Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's top 5 most overrated TV drama series of the 21st century. So this countdown is for TV drama series that had at least half of its run take place after January 1st, 2000. First, a few important disclaimers. It's always tricky doing an overrated list because I'm admittedly going against popular opinion and thus am likely to be met with a lot of disagreement. But as always, this list is just my opinion on shows that get more praise than they deserve. So if you want to lodge your utter disagreement and explain to me why it is I don't understand the brilliance of the show I think is overrated, you're more than welcome to do so in the comments section below. However, keep it civil. I always have comments on approval only on all my videos, so any comments that have insulting or trolling language will not see the light of day. For example, if you call me a moronic imbecile or a fucking retard, you would have wasted your time because I will laugh at your foolishness before deleting the comment before anyone actually sees it. Also important to note is that in order for this show to be eligible for this list, I must have seen at least 75% of its full run, because it would not be fair for me to deem a show overrated by only seeing a couple episodes. So as much as I would like to put The Sopranos on this list, I've only seen a couple episodes, therefore I am not qualified to deem that show overrated. As a result, every show that's on this list is one that I like, because I wouldn't spend time watching the majority of a series that I hate. So that's something for you to keep in mind while you're preparing your angry comments. There is no show on this list that I think is bad. I think every show on this list is a quality show to one degree or another. I just feel that the praise it receives is disproportionate to how good it is. So let's get started. Coming in number 5 is 24. Those of you who've watched my top 10 best shows of the 21st century might be a bit confused because this ranked at number 8 on that. But I do think that this show is both one of the best of the 21st century and also one of the most overrated. This is the only show. Show that you will find on both lists, so fans of Breaking Bad can relax. The reason I think this show is both great and overrated is because I firmly believe this show became horrible in its later years as it just recycled every single storyline and plot point from earlier seasons. By the time the show was in its last 2 seasons, it was completely void of anything resembling originality, and yet the show was still winning Best Drama Series at the Emmys in its later seasons, and no one seemed to acknowledge the fact that the show has long ago jumped the shark and was only an echo of what it once was. I mean, how many times can Jack Bauer's loved one be kidnapped and used by terrorists to make him do what they want? I mean, come on. It might have been interesting the first 50 times they did it, but after a while it gets old. And that's only one example. Watching the final season, I could almost predict every single thing that happened because they were plot devices they used before. Even the way they ended the whole series was just a rip-off of what happened at the season 4 finale. I still acknowledge that this is one of the best shows of the 21st century that was exciting and set the bar for suspenseful television and pioneered many of the serialized series that followed it. But this show ran on for far too long, and its whole second half was uninspired. And at this stage, it didn't deserve to be nominated for Emmys, let alone win them. Number 4 is Firefly. Now, at this stage, you might be saying, "No, wait a second. This show was canceled before it even completed its first season. How can you call it overrated?" Well, despite the fact that the show wasn't a commercial success when it was on air, it was a huge hit on DVD and had a gigantic cult following. that inspired a movie spinoff. I can't think of any show canceled in its first season that can say that. So let me be clear, I like this show a lot. In fact, I intend on watching it again soon, and I only watch shows I really like more than once. But I think the amount of praise this show receives is far more than it deserves. I heard some people refer to it as Joss Whedon's masterpiece, and I recently watched one review where someone was saying it had a cast of some of the most interesting and dynamic characters ever produced for television. I'm sorry, but that's where I'm going to have to disagree. In fact, at the risk of sounding like a douchebag to fans of the show, I would even go as far to say that this show featured some of the most uninteresting, cliched, and cardboard characters of any TV series, particularly for one that was with the popularity of this show. Let's go through some of them. We have the captain, who is a typical Han Solo loner type with an attitude, and is kind of similar to SG-1's Colonel O'Neill and his wit. Who is the stereotypically badass rebel captain. Then you have his cliched loyal first officer, who is just a cardboard cutout without much personality, and the captain's equally stereotypical love interest, who he's always fighting with because they deny their attraction for each other. And the typical calm character of wisdom, who tries to keep them grounded and bestows wisdom upon them in a cryptic manner. And the engineer, who loves their engines and performs miracles when it's needed. And the comic relief. And then the most stereotypical character of all, the badass security guard, who just wants to shoot everything or blow it up. The only two characters for me that made the show interesting, who I felt were actually unique and dynamic characters, were River Tam and her brother Simon. I read a lot of amateur science fiction stories where you could tell the writer was just mimicking all the overused stereotypes of science fiction television, and this show reminded me a lot of those stories. Also, this show tried too hard to be a Western. There was already a show that combined space and Westerns and had a lot of similar stereotypes that I just talked about for the main characters. It was called Star Trek. And this show is not Star Trek. Don't get me wrong, I still really like this show, and I also feel its cancellation at such an early stage was one of the biggest tragedies in TV history. And it's set in an exciting series that always made me want to see the next episode. And I found the universe it created that's centered around a story of a failed rebellion and a group of outcasts living on the edge of an authoritarian society to be extremely intriguing. But a masterpiece? Let's not get carried away. Number 3 is The Walking Dead. So right off, I'll admit my bias. I typically hate zombie movies, or in this case shows. I feel that is one of the most overused and unoriginal movie tropes, and they typically hold no interest for me whatsoever. Therefore, it's actually a testament to how good this show is that it managed to keep someone with a pre-existing disposition to the entire show's structure interested in tuning in week by week. In fact, I make this video after I had just watched the season 5 premiere, which I thought was amazing. But I still find this show gets far more praise than it deserves. Some of my friends seem to get just as excited for new episodes of this show as a new episode of Game of Thrones. I even saw some people who had the audacity to say that this show was better than Game of Thrones. Oh, whoa, calm down there, Sparky. For me, this show is just something to pass the time while I'm waiting for Game of Thrones' new season to start. Even people who now dismiss this show as not being as good will say that it had an amazing first season, which I also disagree with. Its first season was good, but I don't really see what's so great about it. It seemed to follow the same structure as any other zombie apocalypse movie. It just stretched it out over a number of episodes rather than a 2-hour movie. But putting the zombie genre aside for a moment, the main problem I have with this show is you really don't care what happens to the characters at all. Some people point to the fact that so many characters are killed off and new ones come to take their place as a strength because But I see it as a weakness because you cease to care about people knowing they'll probably die soon. Plus, most don't stick around long enough for you to get to know them. Plus, the main character, Rick, whom we're supposed to identify with the most, has gone through an enormous character change and has done some things so despicable I no longer care what happens to him or his annoying son. I know it's supposed to show him as a dynamic character going through changes, but I think they played it too heavily to the point where I don't care what happens to him anymore and would probably prefer if he died. The moment he left the hiker calling for help behind to get eaten by zombies for no apparent reason was the moment I said, okay, I'm done caring about what happens to this character. The main thing that concerns me now is that unlike other serialized shows that have a single story arc throughout the entire series, this story doesn't actually seem to be on any sort of journey. It's just following the wacky adventures of these characters who encounter other diverse and different groups of people, but essentially the same thing happens every time. They turn out to be villains who try to kill them. So basically it just repeats the same tropes on an endless stream of a story that doesn't seem to be building to anything. Plus I heard that the showrunners have no long-term plans for the show and just plan to keep it running as long as they can, like The Simpsons. And hearing that is very disconcerting because I'm already getting sick of them repeating the same story beats over and over. Number 2 is Mad Men. This is probably the show on the list I like the least. Although it was interesting enough to keep me watching it, I did finally give up on it during its 5th season when I realized I had absolutely no investment in what happened to any of these characters and didn't really care about what would happen next. It's overrated because although this is well acted, well written, well produced character drama, there's absolutely nothing about the series that screams greatness. When it won the Best Drama Emmy numerous times and is generally considered one of the best drama shows to ever be on TV, and I personally don't get why. I'll address the elephant in the room, and that this show is boring. Even when it was interesting, it moved at a much slower pace than I would have liked, but for the most part I found the show lacked anything resembling a coherent and interesting plot to hold on to, and for the majority of its series run, it was boring. There, I said it. Although, as I said, there are certain things about this show to appreciate and that should be celebrated. The fact that it is so boring at times and incapable of holding one's interest over a prolonged period of time, which for me is a requirement of a great TV series, disqualifies this show as being considered great. Although, again, it could come down to my personal opinion of the types of shows I find interesting, as I heard many like this show because of its accurate depiction of the 1960s and what it was like to live in that time period. However, I feel it's a bit too heavy-handed with that at times, and plus I have no personal interest in that time period. Also, many were attracted to the main character of Don Draper as a fast-talking, suave, elegant, and yet very masculine James Bond type man who always gets what he wants. When I have absolute zero interest in a character like that. Although I acknowledge John Hamm is a good actor, there was nothing about that character I found appealing or intriguing that made me want to tune in next week. So overall, I'm completely baffled that this show received the praise that it did. And my number 1 most overrated TV drama series of the 21st century is The Wire. So I can imagine many people's heads exploding as they were watching this. Let me reassure you that I do like this show a lot, probably more than most other shows on this list, but I had to put this show at number 1 because the amount of praise that this show gets is ridiculous. So yeah, this show was not very commercially successful when it was on air, and many people point to the fact that it was on HBO as a reason for why it wasn't canceled earlier. But this is regarded by an alarmingly number of people as the greatest show ever to air on television, and I'm sorry, I just don't see it. If there's ever a best of TV show list online in which this show is eligible for, you can guarantee it will be on it somewhere near the top, if not on the top. Before I watched the show, I had several friends independently tell me this was the greatest TV show ever. In fact, I feel I might have enjoyed this show a lot more had it not been so ridiculously overhyped. Again, my genre bias might come into play because I'm not a huge fan of cop show genre. I mean, I don't hate cop shows, but I'm not hugely into them either. So, do I think this is one of the best, if not the best, cop shows ever? Sure, absolutely. Would I recommend this show over one of the million CSI, Law and Order, or NYPD Blue type shows? Absolutely. I would say don't bother with any of those shows, just watch The Wire instead. But, is it the greatest show to ever air on television? Not by a long shot. This is another show I watched and I'm just completely baffled as to why people think it's so great. I really don't get it. One of this show's strengths is its realism, as it presents realistic situations and characters not found on a typical cop show. But it's also one of its greatest weaknesses, as being a cop in real life is actually kind of boring and involves a lot of paperwork. So being so realistic, I'm sorry to say, made this show kind of boring as well. And this show brought a whole new meaning to the term slow-paced. For the people who complain that shows like Lost, Game of Thrones, and The Walking Dead move at a slow pace, you should check out The Wire. It moves at an unbelievably slow pace. It makes those shows look like fast-paced in comparison. While some might like this because it gives it more time to focus on character development, I feel it has the added problem of making you lose interest in the overarching story they were trying to tell. Although I like the show for its realistic portrayal of street life and how it actually got you to sympathize with the so-called thugs and villains of the show, at the same time I didn't feel the show had any characters I could hold on to or relate to, and no one that I actually liked. In fact, I'll admit I never found the motivation to watch the show's final season. I might do one day when I get around to it, but that right there is the biggest signifier to me that this is not a great show, because a great show will have me feeling like I'm going through heroin withdrawals waiting for the next season to come out, and having me being willing to bash my way through a crowd of people when the next episode airs because I'm so desperate to watch it. And this didn't do that for me at all. Again, this might have a lot to do with my personal taste and what I find appealing in the story. I will admit The Wire is a well-acted, well-produced show worth watching, but in my opinion it is a long way off from being called one of the greatest shows on television. So that's it for my top 5 overrated shows of the 21st century. You may now commence writing your angry replies. But if you actually agreed with all 5 shows on my list, please comment and let me know, because I'd actually be surprised if someone totally agreed with me on this. And I'd like to hear from you if you do. And if this video didn't anger you too much, you should check out my channel for more reviews. And thanks a lot for watching.